Today, this is just a brief introduction into a basic concept for initial attack. This isn't going to be discussing really how to be an IC4 incident commander or strategy and tactics of initial attack. It's focused on Type 4 incident organization and initial attack teams, those two concepts about how that all works. So just be kind of a brief introduction, because in here, just looking around, we've got some folks with lots of fire experience, and we got some folks who are brand new to the game. So we'll be starting with this concept about how we safely and efficiently and effectively organize for initial attack at that Type 4 level. So just in general terms, as we're moving through a fire season, and we typically start fire season somewhere in June-ish, sometimes earlier, but typically June, and then we move through July, August, September, typically start trailing off into October and November and go out of fire season. But how does our initial attack response change over the fire season? How's it change?
Well, I guess as the season kicks off, you're more hasty in your departure. You call air attack, ASAP, do things just a little bit differently in the August months.
In the August months, in the middle of the fire season, in the height of the fire season. Yep, so exactly. As we move through the fire season and we get into higher fire danger, our response, our initial attack response, is going to be greater. It's also going to be more diverse. And we're doing that to meet the conditions that are occurring day to day as the fire season progresses. Like basic concept, right? So if you're looking at that and you're thinking about that over the fire season, and this is an example of one of our local ERC pocket cards, that happens to be at Fire Danger Rating Area 2, which is the Canyon Grasslands area. You can see this curve. It's running from June to October and a little bit beyond, and you can see it's got a curve. It basically mimics a bell curve, or what's normally called a normal distribution curve, right? So fire season curves up high. We're more likely to get big fires. Those fires are likely to be resistant to containment and control as the fire season progresses, right into the heart of the fire season. Obvious concept. But it's worth repeating, and it's worth thinking about, because that changes how we do business. Early season, maybe we send out an engine or two, because the fire danger is low, or it's moderate. We're not too concerned. As it ramps up, we start to do things differently, right? So when we get into that, our initial attack response, when we get into high fire danger or beyond, into extreme, etc., things are going to change. So what's a typical response when we get into this area of the fire season, when we've got high fire danger plus? What's typical?
Aggressive.
It's aggressive, for sure. It's more aggressive. It's more urgent.
You're going to call
what else?
As many resources as you know you have in your area as quickly as possible, regardless of even having seen the fire.
What's typically going, if we get the fire bell goes off, the phone call comes in, we've got a fire, what typically is going to happen in that scenario?
You're sending the barn.
You're sending the barn. Yes, you're sending the barn. So you're talking about engines. You're talking about hand crews. You're talking about aircraft. And you're talking about heavy equipment. That's pretty typical, right? So again, early season, send a few engines, whatever. But when we get into this, it's an automatic that most of this is just, it's going. It's going right off the bat. And that's based off here with our dispatch center. Of course, we have blocks, and these dispatch blocks, depending on the fire danger rating, we are going to send some of this stuff automatically. When we get into high, helicopters going, heavy equipment's going, hand crews going, engines are going, automatically. So that's the situation as we move from where we are right now in early season and we start bumping into July and August. this is going to be more likely, right? We're going to be sending more. So this brings us to another basic concept, which is we type fires by 5 being the lowest complexity fire, and then the next up is a 4, and the next up is a 3, and the next up is a 2, and 1 is at the top of that. We type fires by complexity, right? So if we were talking about what the difference is between a type 5 fire, which is the lowest complexity, and a type 4 fire, which is the next up complexity, because we're talking about initial attack organization for a type 4 fire. What is the difference between the two, 5 and 4? Anybody?
Mixed wing air.
That's one of the things right off the bat. If you've got a type 4 incident, it's likely that you're going to have ground and air, right? Ground and air.
Yeah, a mixture of resources, different types.
You got a mixture of resources. A type 5 will typically have all the same type of resources. Again, engines, right? So there is a number of different things that are increased complexity, a number. We're just going to cover a few of them, but there's more. So one of them is just the number of resources, right? If there's 500 engines going, that's more complex than 2 engines going. Just more bodies and more equipment to deal with, right? So strictly speaking, just the number of them is going to bump you up from a 5 to a 4. Then the type, as Kyle mentioned, the type of resources is the other. When you have mixed resources, that's more complex because you have different tools that are working, right? They're different. They have different functions and they have different uses. So that increases our complexity. And then you have just fire size. Type 5 fires are usually smaller. Not necessarily. A grass fire can be low complexity in a type 5 because that fuel type is less complex than a timber type, right? So, but fire size is going to increase the complexity. Why, Kat? Why? Why would that be so? Fire size.
Because it's bigger.
Yeah, I mean, it's bigger.
If
So-
the spread is very high, that's going to increase your size. If
Sure.
it's spreading that fast, it's probably
Yeah,
complex.
right, yeah, totally. And also just, say again?
It requires more resources.
Yeah, it definitely does, absolutely. And you know, if you think about, if we were talking about a fire that was basically the size of this room, when we roll up on it, we can see it all. We can just see it in one glance. We can stand there and see every little corner of it. That means we can see the hazard. We can see the fire behavior in every part of it. Yeah. But when you get bigger, especially with a timber fire, that you think about an acre, which is roughly the size of a football field. If you bump it up to 5 and you're in a timber, can you see the entire fire? Typically not, right? So just the fact that we cannot see it all in one glance increases complexity, right? Yep. And then, of course, the obvious one is fire behavior. If you have a fire, type 5 fire, and the flame lengths or flame height is 3 to 6 inches, pretty low complexity, right? But if you're talking torching, spotting, flame length or flame heights or, hip high or so, that all this increases the complexity of it because suddenly you got a fire that's moving very quickly, the rate of spread is quicker, fire behavior is elevated, so all that increases complexity and bumps it up to a 4. And there's others we could talk about. Urban interface. If you have a fire that has an urban interface, in other words, it has houses and such in it, that increases complexity, right? So if you want to delve into, with a little bit more thoroughness into these, there are a couple of documents. The easiest place to go is the old IRPG on page 8 and 9. It lists the incident complexity indicators in your IRPG. But basic rule of thumb are these things that are listed up here in the bullets. Those are the basic things. If you want to even dive a little deeper, you can pull out the old Fireline handbook, and it has the indicators in it as well. And if you really want to dive into it, you can go to the Bible of Firefighting, which is the interagency standards for fire and fire aviation operations. It's going to list all those in quite great detail in there in chapter 11, maybe, I can't remember. But they're in there as well. But those are basic concepts for us on how to safely organize and initial attack fires, right? A related piece of this complexity business that's very important to the discussion we're having in terms of organizing and managing a Type 4 incident is this notion of span and control. And what we're looking at on the board as far as the graphic is from page 82, which is an example of an organization under a type 4 incident, right? And what they're talking about is span of control. Does anyone have a quick definition of what span of control is, what the concept is?
How much you can control.
How much you can control. Anybody else tag on to that?
Yeah, the number of things you can effectively organize and keep together.
Yep. Just the number of folks that you can effectively manage and supervise. So it is the book definition. And just sidebar, if you, there's a lot of terminology that goes into the old wildland firefighting. So this hard copy can also be found online by just going to the NWCG website or just punching in the glossary of wildland fire terminology. All the terms are in there. It's like a dictionary of terms, which is handy. And included in that is span of control. The definition is the supervisory ratio from 3 to 7 individuals with 5 to 1 being established as optimum. So what we say in fire, if you're starting to supervise beyond 5 things or 7 things, you're getting outside of your span of control. For instance, if I have a daycare and I'm watching 7 kids, I can probably manage that. If I'm watching 72 kids, probably outside of my span of control, right? Especially with 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? Same concept. So we can see in this graphic that the incident commander has got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 things that incident commander is supervising. Now, can that be done? Yeah, it can be done, right? It can be done. It's a challenge, though, because when the incident commander is talking to the aircraft, and they're talking to the engines, and they're talking to the squad boss and the heavy equipment, they can easily be overloaded because incident commanders at that level need to be focused on what's happening now, but they also need to be focused on what's likely to be happening in the next few hours and the next day or night shift. So that is a challenging position to be put into. So the question arises, so given that, as the fire season progresses and gets fire danger elevates, the question is how do we safely and effectively initial attack Type 4 incident given the complexities and the span of control issues? How do we do that?
You establish a point of contact for those that air and heavy equipment so that those people can navigate the air. You're not going to be able to know what the doser's doing and what the helicopters are doing.
Yep. Anyone? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Anybody else tag on to that?
Establish your flank leaders early.
Yeah. So basically you're going to delegate some positions to help you manage that and decrease your span of control, to manage your span of control. So one of the ways we do this is through initial attack teams. So wildland firefighting is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And so the team has to know what they're doing. Let me give you a quick definition of what an initial attack team is. It's a group of wildland fire first responders. First responders meaning when a fire call comes in, we, as initial attack folk, are going to be the first to respond. We're the first in, tip of the spear, right? And we're operating within a designated response area. We know the boundaries of where we're going to initial attack in, right? Each of us are located within the specific area that we initial attack, and it has boundaries. That's where we work, all right? So in addition to that, we're in that designated response area. We have pre-identified roles and responsibilities, and we all train together to achieve a commonly understood objective. So as first responders in wildland fire for initial attack, what is our objective? What is it?
Contain the fire.
Contain the fire, yeah. Anything else?
Keep it small.
Keep it small, yep, those are the things. And if you had to specifically identify it, we are trying to safely, priority 1, effectively, efficiently contain and control the fire at the smallest size we can to minimize resource damage, right? We're doing that for public safety, and we're doing that for resource protection. That's our common goal. That's what we're working towards. To do it safely, effectively, and efficiently. And we're going to train together to achieve that. On our team, on our initial attack team, we're going to train to do that, and we're going to know our rules. How many people in here have played a team sport? Every single body. Okay. Yep. And Kyle, what's the team you played on? Lynn
College baseball.
College baseball. Okay. So on that, what position did you play on that team?
I played first base.
First base.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So you're on a team, and you knew your role and your position, right? Yep. So this that you're looking at in terms of our team for initial attack at this Type 4 level, incident complexity Type 4, this is the basic structure of our team. It includes a Type 4 IC, and it has 2 flank leaders. That's what we build off. That's where we start to organize, safely organize and manage a Type 4 incident off that basic structure. And then we add to it underneath those flank leaders. But that's the basic structure. So if you can hold that structure in your head, you got the basic team structure. If you're talking about baseball, there's more, right? Same with initial attack. So the question arises then, how does an IC4 begin organizing a Type 4 incident? How do they begin?
Gathering resources.
Gathering resources. Any other thoughts? Organizing.
Establishing flanks.
Establishing flanks. Yep. There's some other, there's the size up, and there's the hazard assessment, and that's part of it. We're going to talk specifically on a couple of elements of organizing safely for a Type 4 incident. The first, a couple of key aspects of what the Type 4 IC does is one is they set the playing field. They establish what the playing field is. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And they build the team. They build the team, right? Those are 2 important functions of what the IC is going to do out there. Okay, so in terms of setting the playing field, part of this is establishing the flanks, because we're going to have flank leaders. So that means that every person that's arriving on that fire needs to know what the playing field. Which flank are they on? I don't know. If you've been around initial attack for a while, you will know that this is harder than it seems. It seems like it should be simple, but communicating which flank you are on and where the head or the hill on is often a stumbling block for safely organizing a fire. So with that will help is, of course, knowing the parts of a fire, head, heel, left, right, but generally on a fire that is on flat ground, we are going to describe it from heel to head. That little stick figure is looking from standing at the heel, looking towards the head. And so in that case, what does that mean in terms of left and right?
Yeah, anchors right, skiers left.
We'll get into that. That's a whole other thing. This is flat ground. But yes. So the way that the person is oriented is from looking again from the heel to the head. So that means the left is on that side, the right is on that side, and the left is on that side, right? So if we all know that that's how we're going to establish that helps, heel to head. So another problem that arises though with this is if we have a fire on a slope, things get a little more confusing, right? One of the things that can help you and help ICs establish which flank is which is by this notion, as you mentioned, Danny, it's hiker or skier. And so skiers don't ski uphill, right? So if someone says skiers left, what does that mean? Yeah, so what they're saying is they're looking downhill and on the downhill left, skiers left. And if they say hikers right, it means they're heading up the hill and it's the right-hand side, right? So that can really help organize quickly the playing field. And the reason that that is so critical is because as we have a load and a mass of resources coming in, we need to be able to effectively communicate to them where they're going, which part of the fire they're going to. And again, this is more challenging than you would think, but it's an important concept to start working with and understanding. And so, in terms of the flanks, the IC is going to establish flank leaders, but what are they and what do they do?
They lead.
Pardon?
A lot of us that they lead their flank to go progressively on that side.
Yep. Yep.
They split off what they're given by you, and they delegate tasks further down.
Yep. Yep. All that is true. The IC establishes who the flank leaders are, and thereby reducing their span of control by putting two people that are divvying up the fire into two flanks, and those flank leaders are essentially in charge of that particular flank that they are assigned to, right? And they have some specific things that they're up to. One is that they're directing the resources assigned to their designated portion of the fire. In other words, their flank, right? The other thing they do is they assess the needs of the flank, and they communicate progress or difficulties on up the chain and on down the chain. But they're going to say, I need this and this and this to the IC. IC can place those orders, and then they'll fill those needs. And this one probably is probably the most important. They're going to ensure the safety of the folks working on that particular flank by making sure LCS is established and all that sort of thing. And then they'll assign tasks, and as was mentioned, they're going to designate subordinate roles, right, on their flank. So that's basically what they do. So why there is no NWCG, National Wildfire Coordinating position for flank leaders. There's no task book, there's no class. Why, where is this? Why do we have flank leaders anyway? And what are they similar to in a qualified position?
Well, flank leader is similar to what a division supervisor would be doing on the higher complexity fires, the type 1, type 2s. I think we determine them as flank leaders so that we don't run into the need for having a task book.
Yeah.
But they're qualified as an engine boss or an IC that can do the job.
Yep. Yep. Part of the problem was, if you think about, they do basically function as a mini div sup, a division supervisor. But how long does it take to become a division supervisor? Yeah, it takes a very long time. And so there are not that many division supervisors floating around in any given initial attack response area. In other words, we're shorthanded on division supervisors. It would be great if we had a bunch of them, but we don't. So, given the complexity, when we go from a 3 to a 4 to a 5, we can do things a little bit differently. We can use these flank leaders. They're not qualified div sups, but they basically function as div sups at the type 4 level.
It's good, like, de facto training for div sup jobs.
Yeah, sure. It basically does that. Yep. And as was mentioned, typically the way we run it up here is we would like to see our flank leaders to be at least single resource boss qualified. And the single resource bosses are engine bosses, crew bosses, heavy equipment bosses, felling bosses, and there's a few others. But typically it takes, what would you say, to become a single resource boss?
Handful of years.
I'd say 5 or 6 years typically to become a single resource boss, right? So we would like them to see them qualified at least at that level, and at a minimum as an IC5 / FT1 squad boss. That's where I'd like to see him, right? So in the case of, we've got 2 flank leaders, and we had one who is a qualified single resource boss, and the other one is a qualified IC5. Good. We usually give the less active flank to the IC5, right? So going back and taking a look at how we do that, in this case, we're looking at the alpha flank, in other words, the left flank, looking from heel to head. And we've got a flank leader, and we usually designate those alpha and bravo, typically. Doesn't have to be that, or some cases, sometimes we'll say left, right, but typically we'll go with alpha. And so if someone calls alpha, that'll go right to the flank leader. The flank leader is alpha, right? And so underneath them, as we talked about, subordinate roles and common tasks that need to be done on a flank in a Type 4 complexity issue, we're going to have aircraft, meaning helicopters and or seats and or larger tankers, retardant tankers, right? So we need to establish an aircraft ground contact. And we also have this other position, which is heavy equipment contact on those flanks, right? So the question arises, what role do these positions play on the team, on an initial attack team, and what qualifications or experience should they have in those roles? There is no task book for an aircraft ground contact. There is no task book for a heavy equipment contact, although once you start functioning in that role in a bit and you're working towards what is the equivalent NWCG position, not equivalent, but what's that? Dozer boss, yep. Heavy equipment boss, right? But how many folks in here are heavy equipment boss qualified? 1, 2, and a trainee. So in this group, two trainees, 2 qualified. So in this group of 16 people or so, we've only got 2 qualified. So that's a good indicator because heavy equipment bosses, again, take a while to get that qualification, and they're in high demand. High demand. So we don't always have a qualified person for that. But they are functioning in a role where slightly different than a heavy equipment boss who is more of a supervisor. In this role, the heavy equipment contact is providing the communication link between the heavy equipment operator and the IC. Meaning they're traveling with the piece of heavy equipment, they're watching fire behavior, right? The person that's going, because the dozer operator, let's say, or the heavy equipment operator is pretty focused on their job, running the machinery. And what is the thing about dozers that makes it problematic in terms of communication?
Radio.
They're noisy. They are noisy. Some cases they may have a headset, but even then it's a little dicey. So that person that is working with the piece of heavy equipment, they're looking for hazards that for the dozer, and they're keeping a close ear on whatever is going on so that they can communicate that to the dozer operator, and that they're, again, keeping an eye on fire behavior and progression as they go around the way. That's an important piece. Typically, we do not designate 2 heavy equipment contacts. If we've only got 1 dozer, they'll go all around the fire with the dozer. It may be the case that we've got 2 pieces of heavy equipment. One's working on one flank, the other is working on the other. In that case, we will designate 2 heavy equipment contacts. And if we have a heavy equipment boss, that's a standard go-to, you do it, right? But at a minimum, they should, in that role, they should have a number of years of fire experience, and they should be used to working with heavy equipment on fires. And that typically means that they're going to be qualified at least at the squad boss IC5 level, at least there, right? And the aircraft ground contact, what's their role and what are they up to?
Directing helicopters and or seats.
Yep. So they provide the direct communication link between the air resource, in this case we're talking about a helicopter, and coordinating it with the ground resources. So what they're keeping an eye on is making sure that the ground crews that are working on the flank edge are not getting bucket drops dropped on them. So they're coordinating the safety of that, and they are the go-to person on that flank in communication with the aircraft. They're the go-to. They'll probably communicate such things if they're working with the helicopter. You know, good drop, yeah, let's go there next. And so they're directly communicating all that. So this is a very important role on fires. And again, on initial attack type 4 fires. And so that person should have some experience working with aircraft, speaking to aircraft, and have a sizable amount of fire experience before they get bumped into that role, right? And no specific qualification, just time working with those pieces of equipment. And, you know, some people will work towards a HECM or a helicopter crew member qualification, which is a NWCG task book position. But we don't have a lot of those available to us. And then finally, we've got the module leaders, and the module leaders are could be the hand crew leader or the engine leader, and then underneath them we have the module crew members, right? That's what a typical flank organization is going to look like. Let's add a bit more to it. So if we're looking a little broader scale, there's a couple of other important positions that we can add to this. And so we're looking, we've got the IC4, we've got Alpha Flank Leader, we've got Bravo Flank Leader, and then we've thrown a lookout on top of it. And again, there is no task book for a lookout, but this is a critical part of the safety and smooth functioning of a Type 4 organization. That lookout is going to be some distance where they can see the fire in its entirety. And what is the role of the lookout?
Make sure everybody doesn't get burned out.
Yeah, that's basically it, right? And this important role is doing a couple things. One is they're looking at fire behavior, right? They are looking at fire behavior. They understand, they should understand what folks are doing on both flanks, right? They should understand what their progress is and where they're at. The other important piece that lookouts are doing for us is they're usually taking the weather on an hourly basis, right? So what things are they measuring and communicating out every hour to everybody on the fire?
RHs, pigs,
Wind speed.
wind speed,
Yep.
wind direction.
Yep, exactly. So, and so you often hear them like 6-foot fire, 1300 weather. And so that's going to go out to everybody, and you're going to hear the RH. RH is 23 down 2. And when they say down 2, why say down 2? Trend, right? So if you're on the fire and you hear that the RHs went down 2, that just gives you a clue that, oh, things are going not in our favor. If you hear the trend is going up, the RH is going, means the air moisture is increased and fire is less likely to burn intensely. And they'll also do the same thing with temperature. They'll say it's 98, that's up 2. And you're like, oh, trending upward, right? And same with the wind speeds. And they will probably do, as mentioned, the PIG, or probability of ignition, which is going to give you what is the probability of a spot fire creating a new fire. And if that's going up or down, that just gives everybody a sense of, is the fire behavior going to keep going up and increase, or are we starting to trend back down? So those are important things to do. And of course, they're keeping an eye on smoke column, which way the smoke column is leaning, because if the smoke column is leaning out, that means that it's going to be potentially dropping spots over there. They're going to be keeping an eye on, oh, there's trees torching on the left flank. If trees are torching, that means almost certainly you're going to get some spot fires, right? Probably. Especially if the PIG indicates that it's a high probability that there's going to be spot fires. And spot fires are not the friends of initial attack firefighters, or any firefighter. So, and if they're on a slope, they're looking for rolling out material that is coming out and starting a new fire below the operations. Big, important job. And then finally, we have the staging area manager, and this can be a really, not all Type 4s establish a staging area manager, but it can really help organize the fire quickly and diminish the period of chaos at initial attack. And so the staging area manager is going to be at some distance from the fire. The incoming resources are going to stop there first. And what things does the staging area manager do in the team to help things run smoothly?
Tell them where to go, where to park, what hazards they're going to encounter on the roadway.
Yeah.
Get
Yes.
the big equipment.
Yep.
Park.
Yep. So they will And they will give an initial briefing, an initial overview of what is happening with the fire. Fire size, fire name, what the flanks are, who the flank leaders are, yada, yada, yada. They will give that essential first briefing. They'll get another briefing when they hit the fire line. But what the staging area manager does is they will hold the resources there and then trickle the resources in at a steady, sensible pace when the flank leaders can handle the incoming resources. So we manage that. Because if you know initial attack, which many of you do, we're all coming in at different times, right? 3 of us might show up together, and then another one shows up 20 minutes later, and then another one 5 hours, you know, we're all coming in at different times. So if we've got a fire where the access is particularly tight, we don't want everybody showing up at the hill and gumming up the operations because we've got 19 engines and a tender and a dozer and, you know, all that stuff there. We would prefer to have it off to the side where we can send it in a sensible way. The other thing the staging area manager does is when resource orders are placed for hose, water, fuel, Gatorade, sandwiches, whatever, that's where it's going. Then that, again, can be trickled into the fire in an orderly fashion, right? So the staging area manager, there is no qualification for this. It's just a role that someone is going to play in that situation. Typically, they've got some fire experience. They're not going to be a new person. They're not going to be a second-year person. They're going to be someone who's got some experience because they are going to be given briefings and they are going to be communicating with the IC and describing what's going on with the fire to incoming resources. But that gives you sort of a look at what the organization looks like. Let me throw those other things up there. So here we've got the whole organization laid out for you based on that triangle of IC and flank leaders and laid out with the subordinate roles. That's not all of them, but that's the most common ones: aircraft ground contact, heavy equipment, module leaders, and module crew members. And the module crew members are an essential part of the show. Very essential. So if your engine lead gets tasked with the flank leader role, what does that mean for you as the engine crew member?
You're on alpha flight.
You're on alpha flank, and since they're not going to be operating their engine typically as the flank leader, right? So that leaves it to the crew person. Yeah. So it's not that's not bad. It's just recognizing that if your crew leader gets established as one of these, it means you're going to be kind of running the show on the engine, whether it's going back to get water or, you know, getting the hose out. So essentially, you're overseeing that piece of equipment, maybe with another person, maybe another crew member. You'll be working under the supervision of some other folks in there, but essentially, that does kind of trend down to you to handle. So it's just being prepared for that eventuality, right? But that gives you a general sense of what it looks like. And so, basic concept, we've all played sports. One of the things, if you're going to be a successful team, that you all know is you got to practice. You have to practice. It'd be like if we thought we were going to have a winning season as the baseball team and we never had a single practice. We're probably not going to function that well as a team. So, in terms of us and initial attack teams, how the hell do we practice this anyway?
Flag fires, trainings.
Yep. Yep. Let me throw a couple concepts about that in terms of initial attack. So one of the things about initial attack is you'll notice that the staffing changes almost daily. It may be the same 2 days in a row, but usually not likely. It's changing daily. So when we go in for morning briefing, when we're listening to the weather, when we're seeing who's on, when we're finding out what the assignments are today, on that very day, and we're in high fire danger and above, one of the things that we absolutely have to do is we got to, as a group, is say, who's available to fill these roles on the initial attack team? Who do we got to fill? Who can play pitcher? Who can play shortstop, etc. Right? And we've got to discuss those individual roles and responsibilities so that we're clear on what it is. I'm pitcher. I know what the pitcher role is. I'm catcher. I know what the catcher role is. I'm first base. I know what first base does. So we got to talk that over. Okay, and then we can, in preseason or early season, we can practice that team structure on mock fires. You can also do it on Google Earth by just drawing a shape on Google Earth and then discussing how you would organize. So let me ask you one last thing. How would we do as a group if we were in morning brief and we were looking at, hey, this is who we got today. We're in high fire danger. If we get a fire start, it's going to be a type 4. How would we organize? Could we organize? How many type 4s are in this room? 1, 2, boom. We got the IC4 role covered. How many people are single resource boss qualified? 1, 2, not counting you guys, so we could make it work, right? We could make it work. Because they're...
Have the 4, like a 4 trainee with,
Yes,
yeah.
sure. Yep. How many are type 5 IC qualified? Yep. Yep. So, Joe, would you feel comfortable running a flank on a type 4 complexity?
Yeah. Probably
Yeah.
depending on complexity.
Yeah. Okay. So we could probably get that basic structure of an IC4 and 2 flank leaders with what we got here today. We could do it. We got one there, we got one there, we got one there, we got one there. So we could do that. How many folks would feel confident or good about directing aircraft on a flank? There's 1, 2. Okay. Yep. What about working as a heavy equipment contact? Yes. Yes. Yep. Yep. And Aiden, do you have a task book, heavy equipment boss task book open? But you've done some of it, right? Okay. Yep. So we would discuss that. We would include in our discussions what is the role, what are the safety things that you need to be really looking out for in that role. We'd discuss it. What would happen, just out of curiosity, if we didn't have one of those team members available to us right here and now on that day? What should we do? We'd call for one. Well, the duty officer and the gang should be talking to their neighboring partners, right? Because we work with cooperators, i.e. the Forest Service, the BIA, the BLM, and they have staffing in their local area that they're focused on their federal piece. We're focused on the private piece. But when there's a response like that, it's going to probably typically be interagency. So we would say, oh, so-and-so up at the Forest Service is a Type 4 IC. He's going to function, or she's going to function in that role for us today, because we don't have one today. And that would be a call. That should be a call. And that everyone would know, when we get a call, that's who we're going to go to on that, right? So we backfill either from the neighbors or the local cooperators to make sure we've got the pieces of that team, right? That's it. So that's basically how we safely organize for a Type 4 incident. And it's not going to do any good unless you practice. So you can practice that with flag fires right now. Okay. Yes?
Say you respond to a Type 5 incident and you're a Type 5 qualified IC, and it escalates in complexity to that Type 4. You know that a Type 4 IC is on their way. Could you go ahead and divvy up those leader positions and then pass it off when they arrive?
Sure. Yep, you could. And you're holding on. You've placed the resource order. It just hasn't arrived. You've done the right thing. You've got the qualified person. You recognize the complexity, and you're still starting to establish and organize that with what you got. And that's the perfect thing to do. Yep. Okay. Well, anything else? Okay. Good. Goodbye. Go eat lunch. Oh.